The Aftermath of the War by Kitty Cat on AO3. Before I get into this one, I do want to say a few disclaimers. This is not a My Hero Academia podfic, unlike most of mine. This is the one I have written for another fandom called Izetta the Last Witch. For a brief synopsis, it's basically World War II, but with magical girl witches who rides on a rifle. I highly recommend it. And this was actually written before I knew the true ending of that one because the person I was watching it with turned the TV off early. So, just full disclaimers for that one. Summary. When searching for answers to political issues, Finé visits a spot she hasn't in a year. It's there she finds Izetta waiting with the magic. But what does that mean for her when she has a political marriage scheduled with the younger prince of Britannia? When the smoke cleared and the light vanished from the sky, the board had been flipped. Without magic to hold back the ideas of the United States of Atlanta, they signed the deal to help the European nations keep their independence. They cleared the Germanian forces out of Eylstadt and cited the end of the Second World War. Before the ink had dried on the Germanian surrender, their leader, Otto, had already taken his own life. It was the last death in the war. But it was not the last death because of the war. Hundreds of displaced people flooded countries, all looking for any safe refuge. When the numbers grew too high in certain countries, the qualifications rose and more people were turned back onto the streets. Germania was under heavy tax, and its people were suffering to deal with the burden. In the same, the Duchy of Eylstadt faced its own influx of refugees. They all came in search of her, the second coming of the White Witch, the one who had drained all magic from the world and created a place where people could exist without threat of witches like Sophie, where they weren't living in fear of something that they could not control. But Finé could not offer them her, for as the last light had disappeared from the sky and the final trace of magic had been exhausted, so too had her life. So too had the life of Sophie. The strain of the magic on their bodies was too much for either of them to hold, for they both only had one half of the same stone. But unlike other countries, Finé did not shut her borders. She invited all refugees, whether displaced from Germania or brought from other war-torn countries, she allowed them in. She greeted them all as if they were her people, because in a way, they all were. She had made a promise to bring peace to the world. And that started in her own country. After Finé learned of Sieg's death, Bianca replaced his seat on her council. She headed up the task force in charge of keeping peace among the people. Most of her citizens were peaceful beings, but some of the refugees stirred up contention and rumors. Whenever Izetta's name was brought up, each had their own conflicting story of her. Finé heard them all. She went among the people, both in disguise and for audiences. She corrected those who she could about Izetta and urged others to forgive the ones from Germania. Propaganda was a powerful beast, and one she would fight for years. But the biggest loss, that was of Izetta herself, a loss that had changed the tide of the war. The United States of Atlanta found joy in her death, removing all witches from the world. Britannia mourned her death, but Finé could see through their show. It was simply a formality to her. Only those who had been closest to Izetta could understand what her loss really meant. Even those in her country who had held funerals and put memorials for her didn't know the true reason before her mournful end. It wasn't that she was the last witch. It wasn't that she had ended the war by suicide. Rather, it was the fact she was only 15 when she had died. And before that, she was taken by the Germanian forces and used as an experiment for war. Bianca had gotten the papers from the Germanian officials. She was only 12 when she had been caught, not long after their first meetings in the village. Archduchess, Bianca called, knocking on the door gently. Finé sat up quickly, wiping at her eyes to cover up the redness and tear tracks she felt. Bianca opened the door before shutting it behind her slowly. "Pardon the intrusion," she said with a low bow. Finé sucked in a breath, pulling her feet out from under her blanket. "Please, don't be so formal, Bianca. You've been with me enough years to use my name. Finé reminded her as she put on her slippers. Was there a notice I missed? Bianca shook her head, looking over Finé before sighing. No, but I just heard back from our spy in the Germanian forces. He's managed to secure the documents you requested. Finé paused, turning quickly to face Bianca. Then you mean the lab? Did they find it? Bianca hesitated. Not exactly. We still have every reason to believe that the forces buried the cloning lab under rubble with one of their last bombs. But the papers remain safe. You need to come see for yourself. I'll be waiting outside for you. She bowed again before backing out of the room, leaving Finé by herself. Finé sighed, rubbing at her eyes as she pulled her hair into a ponytail. Instantly, Lotta crept in through her door, a big grin on her face. Archduchess, she called in a sing-songy voice, prancing up to Finé. Let's get you changed. I already have the most perfect outfit in mind. She disappeared in Finé's closet as she chuckled, perching on the edge of the bed. She had no time to be crying, as the sole ruler of her kingdom. Finé adjusted her tie, placing one hand in her pocket as the door opened to her advisor's room. Perched on the table was a man she had seen photos of after the war, but had not met in person. He was dressed in Germanian colors, though it wasn't a soldier's uniform, rather that of an aristocrat's suit, with a shawl going over one shoulder. I assume you have already been searched for any concealed weapons, Sir Elliot? Finé asked, approaching him. He laughed slightly, his hair moving in front of his ear as he nodded. Of course. Your guard was quite thorough in her search. He nodded off to the side at Bianca, whose hand rested on her gun. Finé raised a hand and she let it go, bowing her head in respect. I apologize for the necessity, but as I'm sure you'll remember, it was not that long ago that your men had a gun pointed to my head. She pulled a chair out for him, beside her own, and he sat. He sighed, resting his hands on the table where she could see them. You are quite right with that. It has been over a year now. Yet, you still offer Germanian refugees safe haven. She sat in her own chair, nodding. The people have done nothing wrong. Neither have the soldiers who fought in the war. They were all fighting the war of a madman. He didn't argue that, nodding along. Otto was indeed mad. He would have stopped at nothing to conquer the world, despite the heavy loss of our troops and the morale, of which your soldiers seem to be in no short supply. When your family is threatened, would you not do everything in your power to ensure their safety? I suppose, he said, with a slight tip of his head. However, my parents were killed long before the war started, my daughter with them. He paused for a second, but Finé did not speak, just watched. As you know, the reparations put on Germania were high, without food being heavily controlled, with no trade routes established due to the breaking of treaties. Germania's poorest families have no choice but to immigrate elsewhere. The United States of Atlanta has shut off all immigration to Germanians. Finé nodded. I had heard it was strict, but to close their borders entirely is another matter. As much as I pity your folk, I do not see what that has to do with my small duchy. I have few farms of my own, and its crop is used for feeding the influx of refugees. I'm afraid I have none to spare. He bowed his head, averting his eyes. Finé had not gotten used to the sight of men and rules much older than her, bowing out of respect. She was only 17, but they looked to her like she was much older. I apologize. I do not come seeking your food. He looked back up, his lips pressed in a thin line. What is it, then, that you seek? A treaty with you, he admitted, before bowing his head once more. She saw Bianca shift out of the corner of her eye, but a sharp shake of her head made her freeze again. Rather, the allegiances you have with Britannia and larger nations who can provide us the food we need. Finé sighed, shaking her head. That is not something I can do for you. The tensions with Germania are still high, and I don't have the stability to risk my position for your people. I do pity your situation, though. Her hands tightened on the table, and he reached his hand over to grab them. She took them off the table before he could, matching his steady gaze. He finally sighed with a small chuckle. I assumed as much. I am sorry I could not be of more help to you. Finé went to stand, but he moved faster, stopping in front of her. "That is not the only reason I have come," he said quickly, and Finé raised an eyebrow. He took a step back before turning to look at Bianca. "May I have my bag back?" Bianca hesitated, but Finé nodded, and she retrieved a small satchel from the corner of the room. Elliot took it from her, pulling out a small tube. He set it on the table, keeping his hand placed over it. "I have with me the documentation of the cloning of the White Witch." He turned it around on the table, and Finé's breath caught in her throat. "A way to bring Izetta back." "Is that it?" Finé asked, dragging her eyes off the tube and back to his. He shook his head, pulling out a sealed small box from the satchel before setting both down on the table. "I do not recommend opening it, but I also bring the last of the blood we had." He didn't need to clarify whose blood. It was the same she had regretted letting Germania have for the past year. "So this is a bribe," Finé clarified, setting a hand on her chair before sitting back down. He sat down as well, shaking his head. "Not necessarily. I was going to give you this information anyways." He paused before adding, "As well as returning your government spy. He was found out 2 days ago, but I have brought him with me." Finé looked at Bianca, who nodded sharply. "So it's an incentive?" she questioned, and he nodded. "My people need support, and though I am not the ruler, I know that I am the only one who would be willing to do this. I am on orders from no one but myself. The world leaders listen to you, Archduchess. If you sent word to Britannia, surely they could open their borders to more trade." Finé's eyes drifted to the information, and she hesitated. She glanced over to Bianca, who shook her head. "I am sorry," Finé said, and she could see the color drain from the man's face. "But it is something I must discuss with my advisors. As I'm sure you understand, a leader acting alone is a poor leader." He nodded, a small smile appearing on his lips. "Of course. I hold no love for Otto, so don't fear that. Is there anything I could do to convince your advisors to assist us?" Finé mirrored his smile, shaking her head. "I'm afraid not. For the time being, I can set you up in a room within the palace, but I will warn you that you will be under constant surveillance from my guard." He nodded, standing up alongside her. "Thank you for your consideration, Archduchess. It means everything to my people." He shook her hand, bowing, before Bianca escorted him out. As the door shut, Finé reached out, gently touching the tube with the cloning information inside. Sophie remembered her time as the White Witch when she awoke. That would mean Izetta would remember Finé. She could have her dearest friend back, safe in her arms, where she would never let her go again. "Do you need some help?" Bianca asked, offering her arm to Finé. She shook her head, leaving the car on her own before standing up fully. Bianca followed her into the old castle, ducking under the rubble from the last time they had been here. More of it had been cleared away by her people before she had issued the order to not enter the castle. It was still unstable, and she couldn't guarantee protection of her people inside. Finé paused outside the entrance, staring at the memorial created. It was the size of the largest in the city, with children's drawings and food offerings placed around it. Someone had to have come recently, fresh bread and flowers left in the middle. The photos were all of Izetta, some with her riding a rifles, the others of her from the coronation. Placed in the piles of offerings were weapons. It was a sign she had seen in the city, her people laying down their arms in a promise to Izetta, to strive towards peace for the entire world, a place where people could choose their own tomorrow without fear of death. She smiled, kneeling down in front of the memorial. Bianca did the same, lowering her head until it touched the floor. Finé mirrored her, placing her hands under her forehead. "Thank you for your service," she said, before glancing up at the memorial. She stood up slowly, taking a deep breath as she reached her hand down for Bianca. She took it, nodding her thanks as she stood as well. Finé had nothing to add to the memorial, as she carried nothing but the small dagger her father had gifted her. She stepped forward to enter before pausing and turning to Bianca. "Please, wait out here," she whispered, trying to hold in her tears. Bianca hesitated, but she must have seen the look on Finé's face, because she nodded. Call me if you run into anyone." "I will," Finé promised, before turning and disappearing into the castle ruins. Each step she took further in, bordered between familiar and foreign. Places she had explored with Izetta beside her looked so different after the war. She made her way down the stairs, tracing her fingers over the cracked brick and stone. It was a piece of history, meant to withstand even the Second World War. She reached the bottom of the stairs, wiping her eyes as her vision clouded. She didn't get much opportunity to cry these days, not by herself. She shouldn't shed tears. Izetta had strictly forbidden it when she had made the decision to take her own life, when she had made the idea to suicide bomb both Sophie and the magic. But that was one promise she had to break to her dear friend. She paused at a portion of the wall, her hand tightening into a fist beside it. The passageway to the underside was open. A simple doorway formed. Finé could swear that when they had been down here last, she had ordered it shut. She turned down the hallway, tracing the bricks as they grew more and more intact. That was what the magic she had seen the first time, where the magic was so heavy that time did not pass. The bricks were still as solid as the day they had been placed there, though nature did still manage to creep through. Finé wandered to the center of the room, sitting down in front of the fountain. She lay back, staring up at the ceiling, at the map of the ley lines in the world. Finé had been here since the fall of the magic. The lines of gold that once traversed the ceiling had disappeared, just a blank canvas of a map. When Izetta had destroyed the magic, had it all moved into one spot, just before it was gone? Finé sighed, moving to close her eyes before she paused. She stood up, reaching towards the ceiling with a frown on her face. That couldn't have been right. There was still gold on the map. Gold she knew had not been there last time she had been here. It was so small, it could have just been a faint crack in the brick, or a mirage in the corner of her eye. But no matter how long she stared at it, it didn't disappear. "What is?" she asked, moving to the tops of her toes as she tried to reach for the gold. It was gone the next second. Finé frowned, settling back onto her heels. It was gone. She must have just needed more rest. Magic had been taken from this world with her Izetta, and not a trace had been seen since. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hands before looking back up. As she took a small step forward, the gold dot reappeared, surging in brightness, before settling in place, directly above her on the map. Here was magic. Here was her proof that magic still existed, that the cloning would work. If she hadn't destroyed the files, it was for the best. They wouldn't allow that information into anyone else's hands, and Izetta wouldn't have wanted it. It would have been selfish to keep it. But the magic that had appeared there meant there could have been hope. It could have worked. The sobs came in another attack, shaking her body as she hunched over, grabbing at her stomach. Her hands tightened in her suit as she let herself cry, falling to the floor on her knees. She shouldn't have let her go that day. They could have found another way to defeat Sophie and the Germanian forces. She could have given herself up. It was better for her to have died than the last witch, the girl who had been so full of energy and was only 15. Finé tucked her head in, letting the tears rack through her body until she had no more tears left to shed, until her head pounded and her vision swam as she kept her gaze locked on her hands, the hands that had let Izetta go that day. She looked back up at the dot of gold instead, coming face to face with someone else. "Why are you crying?" the girl above her asked, blinking at her slowly. Finé's heart pounded in her ears as she scrambled up and away from the girl, floating on a thin stick. Her hair was lighter than Finé recalled it, a pale pink color, but her face was the same, her eyes the same caring eyes that had found Finé. Finé laughed slightly, rubbing at her eyes with her hands. "It can't be," she whispered. I watched you die. I watched the magic die." Izetta stared at her before smiling, shaking her head. "I'm sorry," she whispered, before diving off the stick. Finé caught her easily as she tried to tackle her, her arms and legs wrapping around Finé. "I didn't want to leave you. I wanted to go with you." Finé held her tightly, pushing her face into Izetta's shoulder as she stood on her own. The heat that radiated off her skin was so familiar, a feeling that Finé hadn't realized she had missed as much as she had. The way her skin sent chills through Finé, traces of the magic seeping through. This was her Izetta. There was no doubt about it. How? Finé asked, pulling them apart just enough to speak to her. Izetta's eyes were wet with tears, already making tracks down her cheeks. Finé wiped them away, pausing as Izetta leaned into the touch. I wanted to see you. I didn't want to leave, Izetta repeated. But the magic is so weak. I can't. Hey, Finé said softly, guiding Izetta to the floor. Her own legs felt weak, and she didn't want to risk hurting Izetta if she fell. It's okay. You're okay. We're here, Finé said gently, wiping away some of the tears. Izetta nodded, looking at her with those wide eyes before she dove back into her arms. Finé covered her, holding her tighter as they sobbed into each other. Eventually, Izetta pulled away, and Finé let her, though reluctantly. Are you hurt? Finé asked first, looking at Izetta fully. She wore a simple blue gown, traces of gold on the hems. Where did you get this? Finé asked, touching the soft cotton gently. Izetta sniffled, rubbing at her nose. The altar. I know I probably shouldn't have taken it. I don't deserve it, but... Finé took her hands off her face, making Izetta look her in the eyes. Don't ever be saying that. You deserve so much more than what the world can offer you. In fact, that altar was made for you. The townspeople made it. They've made multiple. All for you. Izetta sniffled again, shaking her head. But... No, Finé said, laughing slightly. None of that. You look beautiful. She tightened her grip on her friend's hands, and Izetta smiled before sliding up beside her on the wall. She didn't speak, and Finé didn't push her. She matched her slow breath, tracing the freckles on her hands. They seemed to almost glow gold on her skin, as well as her veins, which shone before settling down every time Finé's thumb grazed them. Izetta said, and Finé looked up to her. Why are you here? She whispered. I mean, I love that you are. I wanted to see you so bad, but... Finé tightened her grip, and Izetta stopped talking. I should be asking you the same question. I've been thinking recently. With the war over, there's some politics that have happened, and I wanted to clear my head. I came here to do that. She looked up at the map on the ceiling, the small dot in the center, the only trace of magic. Izetta was silent a moment longer before she leaned her head on Finé's shoulder. I'm sorry I couldn't do it. I really did try, but the magic, it... Finé leaned her head on Izetta's, and she quieted. I'm glad it didn't work, even if I don't know why. I'm glad you're here, she whispered, looking down at their intertwined hands. She could feel Izetta's skin grow hot, and she frowned, sitting up. Are you okay? Are you sick? She reached forward to feel Izetta's forehead, but she quickly pulled back, shaking her head. I'm fine, she said loudly, patting her cheeks. Finé paused before chuckling, nodding. She reached for Izetta again, and she jumped, before smiling and helping Finé to her feet. Can you... Archduchess, Bianca called, and Finé could hear rocks rolling out of her way. Finé's hand tightened in Izetta's, before she pulled her back and moved her behind a wall. She blocked her body as they moved into the small space, eyes jumping over the area. Izetta shifted, and Finé put her attention back on her friend beside her. She was pressed back against the wall as Finé stood in front of her, leaning on it. Finé? Izetta whispered, blinking up at her. Finé watched her eyes, sparkling with the magic inside, before she took a step back. Just stay here, she whispered, and Izetta nodded quietly. Finé stepped out from behind the wall, pushing her coat back down. Bianca peeked around the corner, her hair falling over her shoulder before she pushed it back. Archduchess? Bianca asked, stepping over the crack towards her. Finé smiled, nodding at her. Bianca, is everything all right? She asked, stepping towards her to ensure she didn't get near Izetta. She could trust Bianca, but she didn't want anyone to know about Izetta. She was her secret to keep now, just until she knew she would be safe. Redford has come seeking an audience with you, Bianca said with a small bow. Her watchful eyes scanned over the room, narrowing at the corner Izetta was tucked behind. A rock moved right at that moment, and she grabbed her gun, flicking it up. "Finé, behind me," she ordered, moving in front of Finé. Finé hesitated as she moved closer to Izetta's position, her hand shaking. As Bianca reached the corner, Finé dove forward, hitting her wrist with the base of her hand, unsecuring the gun as she pulled it from Bianca's hand. Bianca paused, her hand opening and shutting as she lowered it to look at Finé. Finé lowered the gun, handing it back at the base. "We should go," she ordered, moving for the exit. Bianca didn't move, glancing back at the corner and then to Finé. "Archduchess?" she whispered. She glanced up, and Finé watched her eyes find the smallest dot of gold. Her eyes widened slightly, her mouth opening as she turned to Finé. She paused before smiling and following Finé. "Come, the car is ready to take you back to the palace." Finé nodded, letting her lead. Once she was out of the room, Finé turned, but Izetta wasn't there. "I'll come back for you," Finé whispered, hoping that Izetta could hear her. She turned and followed behind Bianca. Finé took a deep breath, smoothing out the dress Lotta had chosen. The doors were pushed open for her, and she nodded at the guards, stepping inside. Elliot sat beside Bianca, his face as still as hers. They both smiled upon seeing her, the first in the room to do so. Sir Redford sat with her other advisors, Warmer, Schneider, and the newest addition of Hans. He was silent out of the four men, and the next person to notice Finé. He stood, pulling out Finé's chair for her. She nodded her thanks as the rest of the men noticed her and finally quieted. Hans sat back down, sitting straight in his chair. Despite the year the war had been done, he was still very stoic, his mannerisms of a general obvious. "Archduchess," he greeted her, bowing his head slightly. She smiled, nodding back as she turned to the entire table. "Sir Redford," she greeted him with a smile. "It has been some time since our last meeting." Redford nodded, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. "Pardon my inquisitive nature. Please explain to me why you have that man in your company." His gaze jumped over to Elliot, who nodded in greeting with a thin-lipped smile. "We were discussing some business prior to your arrival," Finé explained, but she didn't say more on the issue. "What would make the Britannian Foreign Secretary come down to my duchy?" He scoffed, looking away from Elliot to look back at her. "I came with an offer from our king. As you know, Prince Henry has recently chosen a queen to sit beside him. Their wedding is almost upon us, and I was sent to offer a formal invitation." He smiled sweetly at her, leaning forward. There was silence in the room before Schneider laughed. "You get all tense just for that? Leave it to Redford to make it seem like it was a big deal." He slapped Redford on the back, who laughed along with him. "Of course, we have some issues to deal with. We can easily take care of the politics during your trip, but there is the matter of securing your safety," Warmer mentioned, turning to Redford. Finé turned away from their conversation, looking at Elliot, who frowned deeply. Bianca noticed it as well, whispering something to him. He turned to her and began speaking in a hushed tone, one she couldn't hear. "Hans," Finé said softly, and her newest advisor turned to her. His outfit was by far the simplest of them, even his large scar seeming muted. "What is it, Archduchess?" he asked, leaning towards her. "What are the people saying about this issue?" He was her most trusted advisor when it came to the people. He was never high-ranking before the war, meaning his ideas reflected most of theirs. He didn't ask what issue she meant. It had been in whispers and gossip columns and newspapers she had come across. "Prince Henry once offered his hand to you," Hans reminded her. "No one wanted that marriage. It would mean you would give up your spot as the Archduchess. However," he paused and waited until Finé nodded at him to continue. "Sir Redford would not have come all this way for simply that invitation. If he proposes what it seems he will, the people will not agree, unless you remain the Archduchess." Finé nodded. "I assumed as much. I'm glad to have you on my side." She smiled at him, and he matched it, before turning back to the three other men. "Sir Redford," she said loudly, and he paused his conversation to turn to her. "What was the true reason for your visit? The journey across the ocean and across the larger continent surely did not warrant just an invitation." She leaned onto her hands to watch him, and he jumped slightly under the stare. Well, Archduchess Ortfiné, he cleared his throat. In the present company, I think it best not to say the real reason for my visits. His gaze moved back over to Elliot's tight-lipped smile. Who I keep in my room of advisors is my business, Finé pointed out. But I'll enlighten you. I imagine you are here to offer me Prince Henry's younger brother, Prince William's hand in marriage. Redford's face went red as she smiled. Am I correct? He coughed, nodding. Yes, that would be the case. But I can assure you, you would not lose your seat on the throne. I would hope not, Finé said, raising an eyebrow. I am perfectly comfortable where I sit, and our country is no longer in need of your aid like it was a year ago. And from what I hear, Prince Wilhelm has plenty of suitable options vying for his hand. Well, yes, Redford said with a small nod. But he has asked for your hand in particular. After all, there is no one who can match your beauty. She laughed slightly, leaning forward. I assure you that your compliments will not influence my decision. My country is in good standing with Britannia, and I would hate for my decision to influence that. He paused, looking over to Elliot. Perhaps we can help each other out. Britannia has far more resources to trade and more alliances that may help Germania's efforts. Redford stuttered as Elliot sat at Moore, looking between Finé and Redford. Here is what I can offer you, Finé said, and he stopped stuttering. I will attend Prince Henry's wedding, and I will speak to his brother. However, she looked at Elliot, who nodded slightly. If this marriage is something I will consider, it depends on what it has to offer me. Redford flushed, nodding. You have no nobles in your country. The only ones who would be your advisor's children, and they are all married and far older. Securing a line with Britannia's royal family will gain you many advantages, including a stronger alliance with our country and the opportunity for an heir. You are still young, but an heir is a top priority for all rulers. He hesitated slightly, nodding. Finé sighed, putting her hands back in her lap. I have to agree. I am still young, but that does not mean I am naive. A child of Britannia's royal family is raised for the throne. However, as my husband, he would only place beside my advisors, even lower due to his age. Redford didn't respond, and Finé knew all eyes were on her. I will not decline, but I will not accept. First, I have some conditions of my own. Of course, Redford said with a nod. We are prepared to offer you a high price. She laughed. I have no need for your money. Must you forget that my duchy had no reparations to pay for, and all my damages were dealt with through Germania? She looked at Elliot, who lowered his head. First, I must meet this man who is to be my husband. Second, we both must agree, without pressure from his family. Third, he will be an advisor, but will have no power over me or final decisions on my kingdom. Redford nodded along with each condition. Fourth, and finally, Britannia will offer more aid to the Germanian forces, and the Duchy of Eylstadt will become a common trade route for your supply of goods. If anything happens to one, the other will stand in protection. Redford stuttered, and Elliot's mouth hung open as he looked between the two. But Finé. Archduchess Ortfiné, she corrected him. These are my conditions, but none will be met if I do not marry him. Archduchess, we should speak about this in private, Warmer cautioned. Finé ignored his plea, waiting for a response. Redford hesitated before nodding. I will speak to Britannia's advisors about it. You will have an answer by the wedding. He stood up, bowing his head before leaving the room. Elliot was the next to stand, nodding his head. Thank you, Archduchess Ortfiné. I will speak to my officials, and we can figure this out. Thank you. He bowed again before leaving the room. As it shut, Finé sighed, leaning into her hands. Archduchess, is this really the smartest choice? Warmer asked, tapping his hands on the desk. I just mean, it would have been better if we could speak before. Nothing is set in stone, Finé said, cutting him off. We still have 3 months before the wedding. I understand the late notice. We will discuss it in the next meeting. She sighed, resting her head on the table. Her muscles ached as the tension sat in, but she didn't have time to rest yet. Archduchess, I would like to speak to Hans and Bianca. She sat up, looking at her trusted advisors. Alone. Schneider frowned, looking between them. Archduchess, surely you don't mean... Schneider, she said, holding a hand up. I am tired. We will discuss this all later, but for now, I need to speak to my advisors in charge of my people, not of my money or foreign affairs. Warmer nodded, standing. Of course, we will be here when you call for us. He nodded his head before leading Schneider from the room. The door shut, and Finé collapsed back onto the table with a groan. Bianca was immediately by her side, rubbing her back gently. Are you all right? She asked, squatting down to look at her on the table. She shifted, blinking slowly at Bianca's worried smile. Just tired, she mumbled, before sitting up slowly. Bianca nodded, standing back up. Of course. What did you want from us? Bianca, she said softly, leaning back at the castle ruins. When you came in, someone was there, Bianca asked, and Hans adjusted to better look at her. Who was it? Izetta, Finé whispered, messing with her nails. Hans stood quickly, his chair scraping on the floor. She's alive. Where is she? He asked again, his voice rushed. Safe, Finé said, and that's how she will stay. But I need her moved. Someone more secured. Somewhere I can keep an eye on her. Bianca nodded. Anything. Only if I can see her again. Thank her. I will do all I can, Hans agreed. But Archduchess Ortfiné, is that what she wants? Finé turned to look at him, and he matched her gaze. Izetta is not someone you can contain. She would drag you through the woods again in an instant. She is happier outside, not caged up in a house. But she will be safe, Finé argued. That is what matters. Bianca, please come with me to get her. Hans, can you make up the Linde safe house? Put some of Bianca's girls on it. No one in or out unmanaged. Hans hesitated, looking between them. We could protect her here, but to send her to Linde? Do the ley lines reach out there? There are no ley lines, Finé said quickly, before sighing. Hans, please, just do as I asked. I'll have her there as soon as I can. Hans looked to Bianca, who nodded before he did the same. Of course, Archduchess. Izetta? Finé asked, stepping back into the rubble of the castle basement. It took a moment before some rocks clattered down and Izetta appeared from behind a corner on her stick, a large smile on her face. Finé! She yelled, diving towards her. Finé caught her, wrapping her arms around her tightly. I was so worried you weren't coming back, she mumbled into Finé's dress. Finé laughed, shaking her head. I will never let you go again, she promised, patting her back. Bianca cleared her throat, and Izetta pulled out of Finé's grip, turning to face her. Bianca, Izetta whispered, before jumping at her. Bianca gasped in surprise, but managed to catch her, lifting her off the floor. You're really alive, Bianca whispered, hugging her tightly. I didn't think you would be. Izetta laughed, jumping down from Bianca's tight hold. Well, it's a long story. She rubbed her neck, looking between the two. What's with that look? Izetta, we're going to move you to a safe house. Out in Linde, Finé explained, taking her hand. She caught the stick as it dropped, tipping her head. It will be safer for you, out of the rubble and out of town. Izetta looked to Bianca, who nodded. But I don't know if I can, she whispered. Finé hesitated, tightening her grip on Izetta's hand. What do you mean, you can't? I mean, I'd love to, she said quickly, smiling. But, this is where the magic brought me back. And the ley lines. She looked up at the map, frowning slightly. They haven't had a chance to refill. Refill? Bianca asked. Do you mean that magic will come back? Izetta flushed, nodding. You can't destroy magic, she whispered. It would destroy the world. All I did was use up the supply, but the creations still exist. It just needs time to refill the rivers of magic. Finé frowned, looking around the rubble. Does that mean the war will start again? She whispered. If magic was back, Izetta would be hunted by all nations again. She had just gotten her back. Izetta shook her head quickly. No, not if no one had access to or feel the magic, just like witches for thousands of years. I just can't get involved in human affairs. She glanced at Finé before looking away with a red face. Is this the only place you can use your magic? Bianca asked softly. Izetta nodded slowly, staring at the map above her. I don't know how long it will take to refill. But there is, she sighed, shaking her head. There's going to be more. Finé frowned as her eyes met Izetta's. More what? Magic? Izetta shook her head. Witches, she whispered. This is ridiculous, Warmer yelled, pacing the space in front of the small table. Izetta stood off to the side, shifting on her heels as Finé tried to calm everyone down. We should have been made aware of this, the second that she was discovered. Finé tapped the table, sighing. Dear Warmer, I already informed you why you were not. At the time, it was best to keep it between just those necessary, but the situation has changed. Bianca stood up, leading Izetta back to the group. She kept her gaze to the floor, humming slightly. She stuttered slightly before looking back up. The magic brought me back. I don't know why me and not Sophie or some other witch, but she hesitated, looking at Finé, who nodded. It wasn't just me it brought back, or will. When the magic works to refill itself, it will make protectors. More witches. More? Schneider asked loudly. That would cause international incidents if that were to get out. More witches like Sophie used as weapons? We must start defending ourselves. Warmer nodded along. We can't be too rash. Izetta, how do you know this will happen? I thought witches had to be born from other witches. Izetta hesitated, messing with her nails. Well, that's not true. She shrugged, looking down to Finé, who nodded. We have regular parents, like you. The magic chooses the witches. So anyone could be a witch? Schneider asked quickly. Izetta hesitated before shaking her head. Finé took her hand, squeezing it tightly. It's okay. Just go ahead and explain what you know. Izetta smiled, nodding. Magic is its own thing. It's created to protect everything about the Earth's life. The flow of water and the roar of fire all come from magic. But as humans came together, magic needed a way of protection. That was when the first witch was born. She shook her head, quickly adding, I don't know her name. It's been lost. There aren't many witches created to protect magic. Only a handful across the world. But the magic ensures that they will find each other. It's like a bond. My grandma's was really strong, which is how I found her when I was 2. She bit her lip, thinking for a second. I haven't seen the birth of a witch myself. I was the last. But my grandmother spoke of it. She'd tell me stories of the signs she saw, the subtle red in the sky, the way the birds seemed to find my mother, and the way the stars seemed to sing. She said it was a small village, that she was traveling to me long before I was born. But when I was, she looked over to Finé, who nodded in encouragement. Well, magic is strong. It chooses who will be a witch before they are born. But for humans, it's too strong. My mother died giving birth to me. Her breath caught in her throat, but Finé tightened her grip. My father raised me. My grandmother says that he could tell I wasn't human. I had a fondness for the trees no other kid did, and from the second I could crawl, I was somehow ending up in strange places. My father gave me to her, just like hers had given her to a witch years before. And from then on, we moved everywhere, found new things and met lots of people. But it wasn't because of me, but the magic that chose me. It was silent for a few minutes, as everyone thought, Izetta's hand still tightly gripped in Finé's. But how will we know? Schneider asked first. None of us have that bond your grandmother did, and we must find them before other nations learn of them. If they are used as weapons, Warmer started. No, Izetta snapped loudly. Everyone looked at her as she shook her head. For all our history, witches stayed out of human affairs.
They are trivial compared to what our jobs were. I will not allow myself to break my promise to my grandmother again."
"If it comes to that, no," Izetta said again.
"I will not use the magic for human warfare ever again, and I will do everything I can to prevent any new witches from being put in that situation."
Izetta straightened up as she spoke, looking between them all, daring them to argue. Finé smiled and nodded. "There we go. Our next order of business is tracking down the witches while keeping it a secret from everyone outside this room." She stood, looking over to Izetta. "Any ideas on how to find them?" Izetta blinked slowly before jumping and nodding.
"Oh, yeah. I don't have a strong bond. At least, grandmother never said I did. But I do have—"
She paused, tapping her pockets of the blue and gold dress.
"Here."
She reached in and pulled out a small red gem, a gold crack running along the middle. Everyone stepped away from her quickly.
"It survived?" Finé whispered. "But Sophie, and your life?"
Izetta shook her head, letting go of Finé's hand to wrap both of hers around the small stone.
"It's fixed now. It won't hurt me like it once did. And Sophie—"
She looked up at Finé, a small smile on her lips.
"She gave it to me before the magic left."
Finé found Izetta wandering the halls, the early morning sun cascading in through the windows.
"Izetta?"
Finé asked, pausing so Izetta would pass her.
Izetta jumped, only just noticing Finé's appearance. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said quickly, moving her hand in front of her face. "I wasn't paying attention, and Lotta just sent me away, and—"
"It's all right, Izetta," Finé said with a small chuckle.
"I'm not upset. I know you wake up early.
Something on your mind?"
Izetta hesitated before nodding, tucking her head down.
Finé took her by the hand, leading her into one of the small storage rooms. The safe house wasn't large, but it had suited Izetta well for the past 2 months, and her when she had visited.
"What is it?"
Finé asked softly, tapping her hand as the door shut.
Izetta looked up at her, and Finé's heart dropped.
It was hard to see in the sunlight and from far away, but this close together, their legs touching from the tight quarters, Izetta did not look okay. Her bags under her eyes were more pronounced, and her skin had a slight blue hue to it. Even her eyes were less vibrant, no gold running through them.
"I need to go back," Izetta whispered softly. "I need to go back to the magic's well. I was thinking about it, and—"
She bit her lip as Finé reached up, pushing a piece of red hair from her face.
"I need it now."
Finé's hand dropped as she nodded.
"I know. Of course you're right. You were brought back to guard the magic, to help with the magic transference, but—"
Her hand tightened at her side. She leaned forward, resting her head against Izetta's shoulder. Izetta wrapped her arms around Finé's back, gently holding her in place.
"I'll be okay. I promise. If something does happen, I will have use of magic there. I have no reason to use the stone until it alerts me of a new witch."
Finé nodded, but didn't speak immediately, sinking deeper into the hold. Their breathing matched up as Izetta gently rubbed Finé's back.
"What will happen after?" she finally asked, quietly.
Izetta's hand stopped.
"After what?"
"When you have the new witches. You told me about the witches' beliefs when we first met." Finé stood up straight, looking down into Izetta's eyes. "They live separate from humans, drifters, or they have their own smaller communities. To keep contact with my duchy, it would be against your culture, wouldn't it?" Izetta looked down, messing with her nails.
"I don't know," she shrugged. "Yes, technically, but I'm the last witch. I can change how witches should act, as long as we do not engage in any warfare."
"Humans will always have war," Finé chimed in. "No matter how much I hate it, it will always be there. You cannot be with humans and not see wars every day."
Izetta nodded. I know. I've had a lot of time to think, but even still—"
She sighed. "I don't know. All I know—" She intertwined her fingers into Finé's, raising their hands up. "I want to be with you." Finé's breath caught in her throat at the confession. She had said things similar in the past, but that was always just Izetta. But now, the look in her eye, it was different. Serious. Finé's heart hammered in her ears at the proximity in the small closet.
the coldness of Izetta's hand, the feel of her breath. She ran her finger over a scar on Izetta's cheek, one she had caused with the war. Izetta leaned into the touch, smiling. Finé's hand gripped her cheek as she leaned in closer until their lips were inches apart. "Izetta," Finé whispered softly. Instead of Izetta pulling away, she closed the last bit of distance, pressing their lips together. Heat radiated through Finé as she gasped, accepting the tender kiss. She could feel Izetta's magic run through her lips tingling slightly and her heart hammering. She pulled away a second later, gasping at the strange feeling. "Finé," Izetta said with a smile. She let go of Finé's hand, wrapping her arm around her neck to staying close. "Finé," she repeated, softer. Izetta went to kiss her again, but Finé raised her hand, blocking her lips. I can't," Finé said, pushing Izetta off her gently. She stepped back into the shelves behind her, still too close to Finé for her comfort. All she wanted to do was pull her closer, promise her that she could stay by Finé's side. "I'm meeting with Prince William in 2 weeks. If my trip leaves in 1, if it all goes right." She hesitated, ripping her eyes away from Izetta's slightly damp ones. "I will be back with an engagement and a wedding planned." That was the snap. Finé swore she could feel it in the air as Izetta dropped her hands completely. That was the moment the slight fire in her eyes died. Her beautiful eyes left Finé's. "Okay," was all she said, and then she was gone, leaving Finé alone with her bounding heart and restless feelings. She didn't have a choice. Her people came first, not her own wants.
Okay, so I know this one is far different to the normal fics I do on this channel. It is, as I said, the only other fic other than My Hero Academia that I've ever written. Other than like ones I'm working on currently that I may or may not post. So there won't be very many of other fandoms on this channel, but this one I felt like it was best to kind of get it out of the way right now that I finished Trespassing, and then wait to start a series until I have this one. So this is actually 2 parts. This will be the first part, and the second part will be in 2 days, so it's Wednesday, and then you're looking at Friday. So the next one will be at Friday. And that one will basically be as long as this one. This stopped around halfway through. For anyone who decided to stick along with this one and listen to it despite not being a part of the fandom, I highly, highly recommend you check out Izetta. The writing isn't like the best. It's not like the best writing in anime I've ever seen. And a lot of stuff is, it's coincidence, whatever. But I think they were limited with the 12 episodes they had. But overall, for an entirely original anime, it's really good, and I love the premise of witches and magical girls in World War II. I love that historical setting. I love how they changed names of things. Like, you could see in this fic, you had the United States of Atlanta instead of United States of America. You had the Germanian forces instead of the German forces. Britannia instead of Britain. There's quite a few others that it mentions in there. Eylstadt, I'm not exactly sure what country it replaces, if any. I haven't actually looked into that. But the anime itself has goes into the blitzkrieg tactics used in World War II, and it doesn't shy away from showing the deaths of war, which was one of my biggest things that I loved about it, because that's also something I loved about Arcane, is that during the war with Zahn, it did not shy away from that, and it actually gave us parts of the Piano Man's life before did the Piano Man die? I don't think the Piano Man died, but bits of the father's lives before it killed them off, and it didn't shy away from showing the fact that war really is devastating, and it doesn't care who it takes, and it usually takes those at the bottom rather than those at the top, because those at the top are anyways, that's a whole little ramble about war and my thoughts on it. As for the actual fic itself, I love these characters. I probably will not write any more for Izetta. I just kind of love them, and I wanted to give them a happy ending, which they technically got in canon that I was not aware of. The last thing I had actually seen of Izetta was when she suicide bombed herself in the magic. I didn't actually see that ending scene where they're together again, but I have seen that now. I just rewatched it right now with my girlfriend. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. The second part of this will come out Friday if anyone actually wants to follow along with this one. And then I plan to start recording another series. I believe the one that won was United Alliance Institute. So I am kind of excited for that one. I'm excited to get back into writing that one. I had like 3 chapters left and I just left it there. Kind of like trespassing, but it's fair warning. United Alliance Institute is far gorier. Like, there's a lot of torture and it's all done, by a kind